From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. The big story in Texas politics this week, state lawmakers passed the largest property tax cut in Texas history. We'll have more on that in just a minute, but first, let's look at some other stories making headlines in Texas politics. State Senator Roland Gutierrez is entering the race for U.S. Senator.
I'm running against Ted Cruz because everything that we've seen in this state has been nothing but taking care of rich people while the poor people, the working class, get screwed over.
The Democrat says the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School that left 19 students and their 2 teachers dead prompted his run. He'll now face fellow Democrat Congressman Colin Allred in the March 2024 primary. Another big name is joining the prosecution team in the impeachment trial of suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton. Former Supreme Court Justice Harriet O'Neill. O'Neill retired from the court in 2010 and now has her own law practice. She'll work alongside attorneys Dick DeGuerin and Rusty Hardin, who were hired by the Texas House of Representatives to prosecute Paxton. Crews are installing a floating marine barrier made of buoys in the Rio Grande River at the Texas-Mexico border. The governor shared these photos on social media of the buoys and razor wire in Eagle Pass. Our sister station in San Antonio got a behind-the-scenes look at the installation. Governor Greg Abbott says the barrier will be a deterrent, stopping migrants from even trying to cross into Texas. But critics, including Congressman Joaquin Castro, says the buoys are drowning devices that will create a bigger humanitarian crisis. On Thursday, the Texas House and Senate passed the largest property tax cut in the state's history. The $18 billion plan reduces the school maintenance and operations tax rate by 10.7 cents. If voters approve, it will increase the homestead exemption to $100,000 and for 3 years put a 20% cap on the taxable value of all other property valued at $5 million or less. It doubles the franchise tax exemption to $2.47 million, eliminating that tax for 67,000 Texas small businesses. And with voter approval, adds 3 elected positions to appraisal boards in counties with populations of 75,000 or more. Lawmakers say the plan will save the average homeowner around $1,200 a year. It took months of back and forth to get a bill to the governor's desk, and while the plan passed with overwhelming support, it was not without some pushback. Scott Braddock, editor of Harvey Kronberg's The Quorum Report, joined me to break it all down. So first things first, historic property tax relief, reaction to the bill.
I had a veteran of television news tell me to never do this on TV, but I'm going to. Historic. He said never use air quotes on TV, but we hear that every 2 and 4 years in Texas, that there's historic property tax relief. There's been some historic reform. You remember that in 2019, that was when the governor was giving his speeches saying that we are going to fix property taxes in Texas. Sounded like they were going to do it forever, but here we are in 2023, and they wrestled with this for how long? For 7 months. Look, I'll give them some credit. People are going to see some real relief over the next 2 years. And I think for the average homeowner, Senator Paul Bettencourt is the point man on taxes for Lieutenant Governor Patrick. He said something like an average of $1,300 for a homeowner, something like that, but it's going to vary, of course, from place to place. You have a $100,000 homestead exemption that Texas voters will vote on and probably pass that with about 90% approval. That's the history of elections like that. And then you have tax compression, which the governor was saying he wanted that, but he was saying he wanted only that, right? And then he retreated from that position. And they're doing something that's a little complicated on appraisals, but that addresses what the speaker has been talking about for the entire session and then a couple of special sessions. So everybody's getting some of what they want, but I would say it's been portrayed in some media as just one of those compromises where everybody gets something and people had to give stuff up. But the governor really lost here. This is the first time, and you know, you've been covering these guys a long time, Abbott and Patrick have never really had a fight like this in public on a public policy question. And the governor's the only one who was saying all or nothing, right? He wanted only tax compression, which most people around the state, and you know, those of us who do this for a living, we still have to learn about that, right? I mean, it's not a well-known thing. But a homestead exemption, that's easy for people to understand. The lieutenant governor had the politics of this, right? And the lieutenant governor all along said, yeah, we'll do some tax compression, but we're going to have the homestead exemption at $100,000, and he was not going to give up on that. And as my publisher, Harvey Kronberg, wrote at quorumreport.com, you have a lieutenant governor who has no problem shooting legislative hostages. You know, he will, you know, take out a bill if he thinks he needs to do that. The governor was vetoing all those bills, trying to, you know, put some pressure on the lawmakers. But if Patrick doesn't care about shooting the hostages. Why would he care if the governor shot some? And he didn't, right? Patrick said that the governor trying to pressure the lawmakers, he said it was a big nothing burger, that didn't work. So they came to this agreement, and people are going to see relief for at least the next 2 years, and then of course the legislature is going to have to address this again.
Let's talk about how it got passed. It flew through the Senate, no problems, as we expected, because again, this was largely a lot of the things that the Senate wanted. In the House, Democrats were really trying to add some things to this bill, to change this bill up, and they were just getting shot down, and it just drug on for hours.
It did, and that was kind of a surprise to even people who watch the legislature closely, and including myself. I thought they're going to come in and vote and go home. They're so tired they don't want to be here anymore, but the Democrats are trying to make the point, and they're seizing on something that I think has really broken through with average Texans. They're trying to make the point that teachers are not getting anything, at least so far, in this legislative session. And the reason that I think it's broken through with folks is I hear from folks all the time who say, hey, Scott, is this true that the state of Texas has more money than it's ever had and teachers did not get a pay raise? And I say, yeah, that's right. And then they want to know how that could possibly happen. Of course, it is probably going to be the case that the lieutenant governor and the governor has said a version of this, that they want to use teacher pay raises as a bargaining chip to try to pass a school voucher or a school choice initiative later this year. And based on comments from the governor's office, we expect that to happen, that battle to play out after the impeachment trial of Ken Paxton, which is supposed to start in the beginning of September.
Yeah. I also want to hone in on something that the Democrats were kind of set on, and that was renters. The Republican lawmakers who are behind this bill will tell you, oh, the savings are going to trickle down to renters. And it's a competitive market. So if those savings don't trickle down, renters can move. That really, if nothing else, it shows that they're a bit out of touch with how people can move around the state and the ability to move around the state. You
can tell that the lieutenant governor has probably not rented since maybe the 70s or the 80s. It's been a little while for him. He said in an interview just the other day that just what you just said. Oh, there are going to suddenly be places that have a month free rent or 2 months free rent, and then the place down the street has to do that. It sounds like, I think for people who do rent and live paycheck to paycheck, that's going to sound like a stand-up comedy act or something. That's not the real world. And of course, I mean, not only were there attempts to try to make sure that some of that does trickle down, but there was also an attempt to just try to give some transparency to renters, such that the people that they're renting from would have to let them know what they were saving on their taxes because of this legislation that was offered by a Democrat from North Texas, and that was not successful either.
Yeah. How do then Republicans take this home to, we have a state where about 40% of the people in the state rent. How do you take this home and say it's a win to those constituents?
Renters typically don't vote in the same way that homeowners do, not in the same numbers. You get the government that you choose, and this is the one that we've got. It's mostly those folks who are homeowners are going to be the most active voters. One of the places that has changed, at least the political dynamic has changed, is in the suburbs, where now you have more people who are at least open to voting for Democrats who are homeowners, and that's why you have these battles in the suburbs between Republicans and Democrats for some of these Texas House seats, and I think that's going to continue on this. But I do think that it's sort of like a giant Band-Aid politically, what has happened with the property tax situation, because we'll go through the next election cycle where people will be seeing the results of this quote-unquote historic property tax relief, but then when you get to the next election cycle, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, folks might not even remember that this happened.
You can read more about the plan and find answers to your questions about how it will impact you at KVUE.com. That's Texas This Week.